He walked in to help a friend, but within minutes, the CEO of Rolls Royce spat at his feet. What the arrogant executive didn't realize was who he had just humiliated, and what would happen exactly 10 minutes later would leave the entire showroom in stunned silence. What did Keanu Reeves do next? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sky over downtown Los Angeles was a soft gray, the kind of overcast that dulled the edges of buildings and gave everything a muted calm. On the edge of a polished avenue, nestled between luxury art galleries and executive suites, stood a discreet Rolls Royce dealership. The windows were spotless. The floor inside was marble, pristine. Each car sat like a sculpture, bathed in soft lights and silent awe. But outside that glass temple, a man leaned casually against a concrete column, unnoticed. Keanu Reeves adjusted the brim of his worn gray cap and slipped his hands into the pockets of his faded black hoodie. His jeans were old but clean, and his boots were scuffed from years of wear. He looked like a man waiting for a friend. He looked like someone with no business near a showroom filled with $500,000 cars. And that's exactly what most people assume. Inside, behind the gleaming reception desk, a young woman in a tight blazer looked up and frowned slightly. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she leaned toward the glass entrance. When she opened the door, her voice was polite but clipped. "Excuse me, sir, this area is for scheduled clients only. Are you here to drive someone?" Keanu turned slowly, a quiet smile in his eyes. "I'm just waiting. My friend has an appointment." She hesitated. "You can wait outside, please. Company policy." There was no irritation in Keanu's response, just a soft nod. Of course. He stepped away from the door, back into the cool air, and leaned against the wall again. He didn't take out his phone. He didn't complain. He just waited, calm as ever. Inside, the world continued without pause. Salesmen in crisp suits ushered affluent clients to cars draped in velvet. Sparkling water was served in glass tumblers. Every step was rehearsed, every word intentional. At the far end of the room, a tall man stood in front of a custom black Wraith with silver trim. His tailored suit was sharp, shoes polished like mirrors. Vincent Harrington, the recently appointed CEO of Rolls Royce North America, sipped espresso from a branded ceramic cup and scanned the showroom with cold precision. He had only been in charge for 8 months, but his reputation preceded him. Ambitious, ruthless, and intolerant of anything less than perfection. His gaze drifted lazily toward the front windows. He noticed the man leaning against the wall outside, dressed in what he considered street clothes. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. He muttered to his assistant without looking, "Why is there a vagrant standing outside my dealership?" "I believe he's with a client, sir," the assistant replied hesitantly. Vincent shook his head, already disinterested. "Then he can wait in the alley, not in my line of sight." He turned back to the Wraith, completely unaware of the man he had just dismissed. Back outside, Keanu remained unbothered. The cool breeze slipped down the alley beside the dealership, stirring the corners of the street flyers on the sidewalk. Every now and then, a luxury car glided by, its engine humming like a whisper. But Keanu wasn't watching the cars. His eyes were fixed on the sky. There was something peaceful about waiting, about not being the center of attention. The truth was, Keanu had done this kind of thing before, many times. He liked helping friends without them feeling small. Today's errand was simple but important. His friend Julian, a gifted mechanic from East LA, had finally saved enough to buy his dream car. The man worked double shifts, rebuilt engines with his bare hands, and never once treated himself to luxury. But now, after years of grit and sacrifice, he had booked a test drive. He was nervous about coming alone. That's why Keanu volunteered to go with him. Not to make a scene, just to stand beside him. Inside, the receptionist returned to her desk and whispered something to a colleague. They both looked out the window. The second woman squinted, then shrugged. Probably just another driver hoping for a tip. In the far corner of the dealership, a quiet figure watched all of this with subdued interest. The elderly man sat in a wheelchair, nearly obscured by a display stand. No one paid him much attention. That's how he preferred it. But he had sharp eyes, eyes that had seen decades of business and human nature. His name was Roland Avery, and though he hadn't said a word yet, he noticed everything, especially the man in the hoodie, standing outside without complaint. Back at the entrance, Keanu glanced down the sidewalk. Julian was running late. He checked his watch, then stepped cautiously back toward the glass door. The receptionist looked up again, visibly irritated. "Can I help you?" "I just wanted to check if Julian Rodriguez has arrived. He has a test drive booked under his name." Her tone softened slightly, but only just. "He hasn't signed in yet." "Okay, thanks." Before Keanu could turn back, another voice cut through the air. Sharper, cold. "Is there a reason this man keeps returning to the door?" Vincent Harrington had walked over, espresso cup in hand, eyebrows raised with theatrical disdain. Keanu stood silently, not flinching. "I've told our team repeatedly," Vincent continued, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is a luxury establishment, not a bus terminal." The receptionist looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Keanu gave a nod and stepped away again. Vincent stared at him a beat longer, then shook his head. Unbelievable. Just then, the gentle jingle of the front door signaled a new arrival. Julian stepped in, eyes wide with nervous excitement. He wore a button-down shirt that was clearly ironed for the occasion, and shoes polished so thoroughly they caught the light. His hands were clean but calloused, hands that had lived under car hoods more than they'd held a steering wheel, like the one he was about to touch. "Keanu," Julian said, smiling with a quiet kind of relief. "Thanks for coming, man." Keanu stepped inside with him, the receptionist blinking in surprise. She glanced between the two, her expression shifting as the pieces didn't add up the way she'd assumed. Before she could say anything, Julian offered his name. "Julian Rodriguez. I have a 2:30 appointment for a test drive." She nodded stiffly, typing into her system. "One moment, please." Vincent, still standing nearby, took another sip of espresso and scoffed. "So this is the buyer," he muttered, not trying to hide it. "Let me guess, first time seeing a Rolls in person?" Julian flushed, caught off guard. Keanu's expression didn't change, but the air around him tightened. Before he could speak, Vincent waved toward one of the lower-level salesmen, barely hiding his disinterest. "Derek, get them set up for the Wraith, and for heaven's sake, don't let them touch the display model." The young salesman nodded reluctantly and came over, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Rodriguez? If you'd like to come this way, I can show you the details before we begin." Julian followed, throwing a hesitant glance at Keanu, who gave him a reassuring nod. They moved down the marble floor toward the vehicle bay. Vincent watched them go, then turned to his assistant. Every few weeks, someone like that sneaks through. No pedigree, no polish, just hope. The assistant didn't reply. Behind him, the man in the wheelchair, Roland Avery, shifted slightly. His fingers pressed lightly against the armrest, eyes still fixed on the man in the hoodie. His lips parted as if he were about to say something, but he remained silent. For now. Keanu, walking quietly behind Julian, placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "You good?" Julian nodded. "Yeah, just wasn't expecting all this." "You belong here," Keanu said softly. "Remember that." Julian smiled again, more confidently this time. In the distance. Vincent returned to his espresso, already forgetting the faces he'd just dismissed. But he wouldn't forget for long. Something was coming, a moment that would turn the air cold, and it would start with a single act, one that the man in the suit would regret for the rest of his life. The car that caught Keanu's eye was parked near the center of the showroom. It was a Phantom Series 2, jet black with silver accents. sitting beneath a skylight that illuminated its chrome grille and glassy finish like a museum piece. Keanu stepped closer, hands behind his back, keeping a respectful distance. He wasn't there to draw attention. He just appreciated craftsmanship, the kind built over generations, with care and intention, and that car had it. He studied the hand-stitched interior through the window, quietly admiring the detail. Every stitch was symmetrical, every panel seamless. He wasn't a man who collected cars, but he understood beauty when he saw it. From across the room, Vincent Harrington caught sight of him again. His eyes narrowed. He had just wrapped up a call with a hedge fund partner and was already irritated by the mention of internal audits. Seeing Keanu so close to the flagship model felt like an invasion. To him, the Phantom wasn't a car, it was a statement. And in his mind, people like Keanu didn't belong anywhere near it. Vincent walked briskly toward the display. A couple nearby, admiring the adjacent Ghost model, stepped back to give him space. He stopped a few feet from Keanu and spoke loudly. "Sir, this area is reserved for serious buyers. Please, step away from the vehicle." Keanu turned, polite as ever. "Of course. I was just looking. I'm with Julian Rodriguez. He's checking in with your team for a test drive." Vincent's tone didn't change. "And who are you exactly? His driver? Assistant? I don't see your name on our schedule." Keanu tilted his head, not answering the question. "Just a friend." Vincent let out a sharp breath, more laugh than sigh. "Right, of course, a friend. That explains the hoodie and those lovely boots." Keanu didn't flinch. His expression remained neutral, almost calm. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," he said, just admiring the design. Vincent took a small step forward. "This isn't a museum, it's a dealership. We don't need tourists." Keanu nodded, taking a slight step back. He didn't raise his voice. "Understood." But that wasn't enough for Vincent. Something about Keanu's composure irked him. He was used to people reacting, getting defensive, explaining themselves, apologizing. This man didn't do any of that. "You know what your problem is?" Vincent said, crossing his arms. "You people think if you walk in here with confidence, someone will believe you belong. You don't. And you never will. Not here." Keanu glanced toward the reception desk. A few staff members had paused. Even Julian, who was reviewing paperwork with the salesman, had looked up. Keanu held his ground, not with defiance, but with patience. He had faced louder men in quieter rooms. What hurt wasn't Vincent's words. It was how comfortable he was saying them. The casual cruelty, the arrogance behind every syllable was the kind of thing Keanu had seen his entire life, but rarely this naked, this public. Julian took a hesitant step forward, unsure if he should intervene. His hand hovered over the contract folder he was holding. He looked at Keanu, who gave him the faintest shake of the head. It was okay. Let it play out. Vincent wasn't finished. "Let me guess," he sneered. "Washed-up actor trying to get attention by hanging around places he can't afford? Happens more than you'd think. This city's full of you people. Nobody's trying to impress someone." A few gasps whispered through the room. One of the younger interns near the back, Mia, looked visibly shaken. She knew exactly who Keanu was, and she also knew he had just been insulted in a way that went far beyond celebrity. Keanu didn't blink. He looked at Vincent and spoke with a steady voice. "I'm just here to support my friend." Vincent laughed. "Support? Like a crutch? You don't get it. This place, this brand, it's about precision, perfection, and presence. None of which you seem to have." Keanu didn't reply. Vincent leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to make the moment feel intimate and sharper. "You think kindness and humility get you somewhere in life? They don't. Power gets you through that door, and you walked in with none." Keanu looked down for a moment, then met Vincent's eyes. There was no anger, just quiet disappointment. "I don't need to be through any door," Keanu said. I came here to open one for someone else." Vincent's jaw flexed. He stepped back and looked around, as if needing an audience. "I've had enough of this," he said louder. "Security, get this man out of here, he's loitering." No one moved. Security wasn't close by. Most of the staff were frozen in place, too stunned to react. Keanu spoke again, calm as ever. "I'll leave, but first, may I have a glass of water while my friend finishes his paperwork?" Vincent snapped. He took a slow step forward, looked down at the marble floor between them, and without warning, spat directly at the ground near Keanu's boots. "You don't deserve to be in here." The sound echoed. The room went silent. Even the soft music overhead seemed to fade. Mia dropped her pen. The receptionist covered her mouth. The salesman helping Julian stopped mid-sentence. Keanu stood still, his eyes lowered to the wet mark on the marble. Then he looked up, and everything changed. Keanu looked at the spot on the floor for only a second longer, then raised his eyes slowly. His expression was unreadable. No fury, no shame, just a deep, unshakable stillness. The kind that didn't ask for justice, but invited it. Julian stood frozen, disbelief spreading across his face. He had never seen Keanu so calm in the face of something so vile. He wanted to say something, to stand up for him, but the words wouldn't form. Keanu gave a subtle glance his way, as if to say, "Not now. Let it unfold." Vincent turned away as if the matter was resolved. He walked toward the espresso bar, calling over his shoulder, "Next time, try the used lot down the street. You might find a car with a busted mirror to match your boots." Keanu didn't follow. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a handkerchief, and gently wiped the spot where the spit had landed. He folded the cloth, placed it back into his hoodie, and turned to walk toward the lounge, where Julian stood trembling with embarrassment and rage. Mia stepped forward slightly, her lips parted, then stopped herself. She looked at the receptionist, whose face was pale. No one moved to stop Keanu. No one dared to look him in the eye. As Keanu approached his friend, Julian finally spoke, his voice low and heavy. "You don't have to stay, man. I'll just leave. This ain't worth it." Keanu shook his head. "Yes, it is. Not for me. For you." "But did you see what he—" "I saw," Keanu said gently. "And so did everyone else." Julian looked around. A few of the younger staff members turned away, pretending not to have witnessed the scene, but the older man in the wheelchair hadn't moved. His eyes were fixed on Keanu, sharp and thoughtful. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket and tapped a small intercom device clipped to his lapel. Across the room, a quiet chime rang at the front desk. The receptionist answered, listened, then nodded quickly. She rose from her chair and walked to Vincent, who was mid-sip of his espresso. She leaned in and whispered something into his ear. Vincent's eyes narrowed. "Now?" She nodded. Vincent grunted, annoyed. "Fine. Bring him to the lounge." Keanu didn't notice the exchange. He sat down beside Julian, his posture relaxed. "Just breathe," he said. "Let him finish his performance." Julian forced a chuckle. "I still can't believe you didn't lose it. If someone did that to me—" Keanu looked ahead calmly. "That's exactly what he wanted. And what do you want?" Keanu's voice was quiet. "I want to see what happens when a man tells the world who he really is." In the background, the receptionist reappeared. "Mr. Reeves," she said carefully. "Mr. Avery would like a word with you, in private." Mia's hands were trembling. She stood behind the reception counter, her eyes locked on Keanu Reeves as he walked calmly back toward the seating area. She had recognized him the moment he stepped through the glass doors. It wasn't just the face she'd seen in movies, it was the way he carried himself. Gentle, grounded, and unshakably kind. You didn't forget a presence like that. Not when you had seen what he did for someone you loved. 2 years earlier, Mia had taken her mother to a cancer fundraiser at a local hospital. They weren't rich. Her mom had fought hard through treatment with little support. Keanu had been the special guest. But unlike the other celebrities, he hadn't come for photo apps or interviews. He had sat beside Mia's mother for half an hour while no cameras were rolling, listening, smiling, holding her hand while she shared her fears. And then, without telling anyone, he'd paid for 6 months of her treatment. No spotlight, no speech, just compassion. Mia had never told anyone, not even her supervisor. She knew it would sound unbelievable, but now, watching the CEO of the company she worked for spit at that same man like he was garbage, something inside her cracked. She wanted to speak. Her body started moving before her mind had caught up. She stepped out from behind the desk, lips parting. "Mr. Harrington." But her supervisor was faster. A firm hand gripped her wrist, pulling her back behind the counter. "Don't," the older woman whispered through her teeth. "You'll lose your internship." Mia blinked. "But it's... he... I know who he is," the woman said quietly. "But it's not our place." The words hit harder than expected. Not our place. Was it really not her place to speak when dignity was spat on in public? She sat back down, staring at her monitor, trying not to cry. Just a few feet away, Julian sat beside Keanu, still rattled. The salesman returned with documents, acting as though nothing had happened. Vincent stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the interaction with detached contempt. He still hadn't realized who Keanu was, and he certainly didn't know what the cameras overhead had captured. The dealership had a state-of-the-art surveillance system, installed last year under the order of the board. Every customer interaction was logged for liability and service purposes. The system was always running, always saving footage to an encrypted server. No one in that showroom was out of view. In the far corner, half hidden by a display partition, the elderly man in the wheelchair continued to watch in silence. Mr. Roland Avery, the original founder of the dealership chain, sat still. He had said nothing since arriving that morning, but every breath, every blink, every quiet observation was building toward something, and no one saw it coming yet. Vincent Harrington leaned against the edge of the service desk, checking his phone as if the last 10 minutes hadn't happened. He scrolled through unread emails, smiling to himself at a congratulatory message from the European board. He had closed a high-prefaces celebrity deal the day before, involving a pop star and a custom Dawn convertible. That was what the brand was about to him. Optics, headlines, prestige, everything he believed Keanu Reeves no longer represented. He didn't notice that nearly every employee on the floor was glancing back and forth between Keanu and the cameras above. Some were too afraid to say anything. Others were simply unsure how to process what they'd just witnessed. Vincent locked his phone and looked up just as Julian approached the Phantom once again, this time accompanied by Derek, the nervous salesman. Keanu stayed back this time, hands in his pockets, giving his friend the space to enjoy the moment. His presence had faded into the background, but not out of mind. Julian circled the car slowly, his fingers hovering just above the mirror-like paint. He looked over at Keanu. "I don't even know if I can go through with it," he whispered. "This feels like a whole different world." Keanu stepped closer, his voice low. "You've worked hard your entire life. That car doesn't change your worth. It just reflects your journey. That's why it matters." Julian's eyes welled slightly. He nodded, then turned to the salesman. "Let's do the test drive." Vincent scoffed under his breath. "That car's about to smell like engine grease." The words weren't loud, but they weren't whispered either. Mia heard them from across the room and clenched her fists under the desk. She looked toward the glass office near the back, where the dealership's surveillance control panel was located. Part of her wanted to run in, download the footage, and email it to the press, but her heart pounded with fear. She thought of her mother, thought of the hospital bills, of how hard it had been to keep the internship just to pay down debt, and she stayed quiet. Mr. Avery still hadn't moved. His fingers tapped lightly on the armrest of his wheelchair, the rhythm slow and deliberate. His eyes studied Vincent's posture, his expressions, his pride. Then he turned slightly, just enough to catch a better angle on Keanu's face. Recognition dawned quietly. He remembered that face from somewhere long ago. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was filled with unspoken memory. And Mr. Avery, for the first time that day, pressed the button on the small microphone clipped to his lapel. It was time to shift the air in the room. The receptionist's headset buzzed softly. She listened, nodded, and immediately stood. Her heels tapped briskly on the marble floor as she approached Vincent, who was now flipping through a brochure like it was a magazine. "Mr. Harrington," she said, "Mr. Avery is requesting your presence in the lounge." Vincent looked up, mildly irritated. "Now?" She nodded. He said, "It's urgent." Vincent checked his watch, sighed, and waved a hand. "Fine. He probably wants to pitch another outdated policy revision." He brushed past her without another glance toward Keanu, Julian, or anyone else. He still didn't realize who he had insulted, still hadn't noticed the subtle shift in the room's temperature. As Vincent disappeared into the rear hallway, Mr. Avery turned his wheelchair ever so slightly, his gaze falling fully on Keanu. There was something measured in the way he looked at him. Not admiration, not pity, just understanding. He had known men like this before. Quiet strength, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. Derek led Julian toward the vehicle bay for the test drive. Keanu stayed behind, letting him take the spotlight. As the doors opened, sunlight streamed in, bouncing off the Phantom's windshield and catching the edge of the security camera mounted above the door. The light made the lens shimmer for a moment. Mia noticed it too. For a second, she imagined the footage already making its way through corporate servers, into the hands of people who still believed in values. She looked back at Keanu, who had taken a seat near the reception area and pulled out his phone, not to text or scroll, but to read quietly, like a man with no rush, no grudge, no need to explain himself. The waiting room had gone from dismissive glances to careful distance. No one sat near him now, not out of discomfort, but respect. Inside the private lounge, Vincent stood impatiently with his hands on his hips. "Well?" he asked. Mr. Avery nodded toward the far seat. "Sit." Vincent obeyed slowly, reluctantly. "Do you know who that man is?" Mr. Avery asked. Vincent shrugged. "Some driver, maybe a D-list actor, certainly not a customer." Mr. Avery's expression didn't change. "You insulted a man who gave more to people he didn't know than you have in your entire career." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Are we really having a conversation about ethics now?" "No," Mr. Avery said. "We're having a conversation about vision, and you just proved you don't have it." Vincent started to speak, but Mr. Avery lifted a hand. "Everything you said, everything you did, was recorded." Vincent froze. The silence grew thick between them. Then Mr. Avery added, "And 10 minutes from now, you'll understand why that matters more than you can imagine." Back in the showroom, Keanu stood, stretching gently, just as Julian returned from the garage, eyes wide from the drive. But neither of them knew yet. Everything was already in motion, and the world was about to change. Julian stepped through the sliding glass doors leading to the private lot behind the dealership, heart pounding against his chest. The Phantom sat waiting like a black panther, sleek, silent, powerful. Its deep gloss shimmered under the California sun. Derek, the salesman, walked a step ahead, clipboard tucked under his arm, giving the usual pre-drive briefing. But Julian heard none of it. His hands were damp with nerves. He was starting to second-guess everything. Behind him, Keanu approached slowly. "Hey," Keanu said. "Want me to ride with you?" Julian hesitated. "You sure that's okay, after all that?" Keanu gave a soft smile. "You're not test-droving a dishwasher. You're handling a $500,000 machine. Every pilot needs a co-pilot." Julian let out a short laugh, half relieved. Yeah, I'd like that. They turned to Derek, who was unlocking the car with the fob. Mind if he comes with me? Julian asked. Before Derek could answer, Vincent's voice rang out across the lot. He had come outside, phone still in hand, lips curled into a smirk. No, Vincent said loudly. He's not a client. We don't let people like him into our vehicles. The words cut through the air like glass. Keanu remained still. Julian looked at the salesman, who froze mid-step. Derek cleared his throat. Actually, sir, company policy allows a test driver to bring one guest for support. Liability forms cover it. There's no restriction unless the guest is intoxicated or a threat. Mr. Reeves is neither. Vincent took a slow breath, holding back whatever curse sat behind his lips. You'll sign for any damage, then? Yes, sir, Derek said quickly. Julian looked down, embarrassed. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. I've sat in worse places, he said softly. The two men climbed into the car. Keanu took the passenger seat, settling in like he'd done it 1,000 times. Julian adjusted the mirrors, took a deep breath, and started the engine. The interior was so quiet, it felt like the air had changed. They pulled smoothly out of the lot, the Phantom gliding over the pavement with an effortless grace. For the first minute, neither of them spoke. Julian focused on the road, his hands tight on the wheel. Keanu waited. You good? Keanu finally asked. Julian exhaled. I don't feel like I belong in this. Keanu looked at him. That's because you're used to building things for others. But this is your moment. You've earned it. Just drive. Julian smiled and pressed lightly on the pedal. The car responded like a whisper. It wasn't long before his grip loosened, his posture relaxed, and a quiet confidence settled into his bones. They drove down a stretch of scenic road that curved past clean sidewalks, quiet parks, and palm trees swaying in the breeze. The windows were rolled halfway down. The breeze cooled Julian's nerves. Every gear shift was smooth. Every turn brought more clarity. Keanu didn't say much, just watched his friend experience something few mechanics ever got to do. Feel what it was like to sit inside the very machines he spent his life fixing. You know, Julian said after a while, I used to work on these from the outside and wonder what kind of people owned them. Thought they were all rich, cold, above it all. Keanu turned to him. And what do you think now? Julian grinned. I think they're just cars, and people are people, some decent, some not. A quiet moment passed. Keanu nodded. Sounds about right. As they pulled up to a red light, Julian reached for the parking button, but Keanu gently stopped him. Want to practice parallel parking? Keanu asked. There's a good spot up ahead. Give it a try. Julian laughed. In this beast? Keanu smiled. I'll guide you. You've done harder things. They rolled slowly forward until they found the space. Keanu gave calm, clear directions. Left. Stop. Reverse gently. Cut the wheel. Straighten. It took less than 2 minutes. Julian didn't hit a single curb. When he shifted to park, he looked over. Well? Keanu gave him a mock bow. You, my friend, just parked a Rolls Royce better than most chauffeurs I've ever seen. Julian leaned back and let out a breath of disbelief. I never thought this day would come. Then Keanu's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and answered with a quiet, yeah. Julian focused on checking the mirrors, giving Keanu space for the call. Keanu's voice stayed soft but firm. He did what? When? Yes, it's on video. Good. No, don't release anything yet. I want the conversation first. And yes, make sure Avery sees it. Julian looked over, but didn't speak. Keanu held up a finger, still listening. I understand. Yes, I'll call you back in 15. Just prep the proposal. Let's see if this is the right time to move. He hung up. Julian waited a second. Everything okay? Keanu nodded. Yeah, just something that needs to be handled the right way. Julian didn't press. He didn't need to. He could tell from Keanu's tone that whatever the call was about, it wasn't personal. It was business. But the kind of business that had weight. "Back to the dealership?" Keanu asked. Julian nodded. "Yeah, let's go." They pulled back onto the road, the engine humming like velvet. And behind the walls of polished glass, a storm was quietly gathering. The Phantom turned smoothly into the rear lot of the dealership, sunlight bouncing off its polished hood. Julian slowed the car as they approached the bay, heart still pounding, but now from pride, not fear. He eased it into the designated return space, double-checked the gear, and shut off the engine. Keanu stepped out first, offering a hand to Julian as he exited. Derek approached from the side with a broad smile. "How'd it go?" he asked. Julian looked at him, still dazed. "Like a dream." Derek handed him a folder. "You're pre-approved. We'll finalize everything once you're ready. No rush. I'll get the paperwork started." Julian nodded, barely able to speak. Keanu glanced toward the entrance. Vincent was there, waiting by the glass doors. Arms folded across his chest like a bouncer outside a nightclub. His expression was tight, his jaw clenched. The sight of Keanu stepping out of the Phantom was clearly aggravating him, but he said nothing. Yet, as Julian walked inside with Derek to complete the paperwork, Keanu trailed behind. He moved without urgency, but with purpose. When he reached the main lobby, Vincent stepped forward to block his path. "Back so soon?" Vincent asked, smirking. "Did you remember to wipe the seats?" Keanu didn't take the bait. He paused just long enough to let the silence do the talking, then gave a soft smile. "You're very invested in who sits in your cars," he said. "Maybe more than who builds them." Vincent tilted his head. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Before Keanu could reply, his phone buzzed again. He stepped aside, answered, and spoke in a calm, measured tone. "Yes, I'm here now. Yes, I heard what happened in Chicago. Send over the revised terms. I want full discretion on how it's handled." He paused. "And yes, the footage is secured. That's what matters." Vincent tried not to look interested, but the words footage and secured landed like cold water. Keanu ended the call and slid the phone back into his hoodie pocket. "You know," he said quietly, "sometimes the most expensive thing in a place like this isn't the car." Vincent stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" Keanu didn't answer. He turned and walked toward the lounge area where Julian had taken a seat, waiting for final documents. Mia watched from the desk, her face pale but focused. The receptionist whispered something to her, but Mia didn't respond. Back at the desk, Vincent reached for his phone, his fingers moving faster now. He didn't realize that every movement in that showroom, including his, was still being recorded. And someone was already watching. Mr. Avery remained in the private office, reviewing live surveillance footage on a secure screen. His eyes didn't blink. His finger hovered above a red button marked Archive Footage, Pull Clip. He had seen enough, and the next decision he made would change everything. The chime of the intercom echoed across the showroom. "All floor staff and department leads, please report to the central lounge immediately." Every voice went quiet. The receptionist froze mid-call. The sales team glanced at each other, confused. Even Vincent looked up from his phone, eyebrows furrowed. This kind of announcement was rare. Spontaneous meetings didn't happen at Rolls Royce dealerships, especially not in the middle of customer hours. But when Roland Avery issued a request, no one questioned it. In less than 5 minutes, the Marble Lounge filled with employees. Managers in tailored suits, sales reps holding clipboards, interns clutching tablets, and service advisors in pressed uniforms all made their way to the circular seating area in the heart of the showroom. Mr. Avery was already there, his wheelchair positioned near the head of the room. A senior assistant stood behind him with a notepad, but the old man didn't need any introductions. The staff recognized him instantly. Many had only seen his photo in the founder's office, hung like a portrait of quiet power. Vincent entered last, straightening his tie and walking with the confidence of a man who believed he was the host. "Mr. Avery," Vincent said loudly, smiling with forced ease. "Thank you for visiting today. We're honored to have you here." He turned to the room and spread his arms like a performer opening a show. "As you all know, we've been pushing for record growth this quarter. Our brand is entering a new phase of luxury, innovation, and selectivity. The experience we deliver here must always reflect that, from the moment a client walks through the door." "Stop," Mr. Avery said. Vincent blinked. The room went silent again. Mr. Avery looked directly at him. "You said selectivity. What does that mean to you?" Vincent hesitated, then cleared his throat. "We curate the experience. We protect the brand by ensuring it isn't diluted by people who don't align with our values." Mr. Avery nodded once, slowly. "Interesting?" Then he pointed to Keanu, who was standing quietly at the back of the room beside Julian. "Who is that man?" Vincent paused. For a second his mind raced. He glanced at Mia, at Derek, then back at Mr. Avery. "That's a guest of a client, not on our registry." Before he could say more, Mia stepped forward. She didn't look at Vincent. She looked straight at Mr. Avery. "That's Keanu Reeves, sir. Actor, philanthropist. And earlier today he was insulted and publicly humiliated by Mr. Harrington for no reason. He wasn't loud, he wasn't demanding, he was just waiting for his friend to test drive a car." Mr. Avery's eyes didn't leave Vincent's face, and for the first time Vincent looked unsure. Mr. Avery sat still for a long moment. His fingers rested gently on the armrest of his wheelchair. The room remained silent, like everyone had stopped breathing at the same time. Keanu didn't move. He kept his head slightly bowed, not out of shame but humility. He wasn't there to embarrass anyone. He hadn't asked for this moment. But now it was here. Vincent attempted to take back control. "With all due respect, Mr. Avery, I think there's some confusion. This gentleman may be known for movies, but that doesn't give him license to—" Mr. Avery raised a single hand. Vincent's voice died instantly. "I asked you a question," Mr. Avery said. "Who is he? Not what you assume, not what you dismissed. Who is this man?" Vincent's throat tightened. "He said he was here for a friend." Mr. Avery turned to Keanu. "And are you?" Keanu nodded once. "Yes, sir." "What friend?" Keanu gestured to Julian, who stood near the edge of the group, still clutching the brochure folder. "Julian Rodriguez, mechanic. He's worked years to afford this car. He didn't want to come alone. I came to support him." Mr. Avery's eyes flicked over to Julian, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Did you feel welcome here today, Mr. Rodriguez?" the old man asked. Julian hesitated. His voice cracked slightly. "Not really, sir. But I didn't come for hospitality. I came for the car." Mr. Avery nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty." He turned back to Keanu. "And you, Mr. Reeves. You've said very little since walking through those doors. Not a single complaint." Keanu's voice was calm. "It's not about me. I'm just here for a friend." That sentence rippled through the room. "Not about me." Mia looked down at her shoes, swallowing hard. Mr. Avery tapped the side of his wheelchair lightly, a slow rhythm of thought. Then he turned to the group. "You know, I built this place 50 years ago on 3 things: precision, service, and respect. Not just for the wealthy, for anyone who walked through that door with dignity." He pointed upward. "There are 27 cameras in this building. They run continuously, not to catch thieves, but to remind us that our actions, even small ones, are seen." Vincent's jaw tightened. Mr. Avery looked back at the crowd. "So I want every person here to remember something. The floor doesn't belong to the man in the nicest suit. It belongs to the one who walks it with integrity." He turned to Keanu. "And today, that's you." Keanu looked down, saying nothing. The staff began to shift. The energy in the room had changed. And for the first time, Vincent couldn't control it. Vincent took a step forward, trying to reclaim the space. "Sir, I believe we're making too much of a misunderstanding. No one was physically harmed, and Mr. Reeves, I'm sure, is more than capable of brushing off a moment of miscommunication. We have clients arriving in 30 minutes, and I recommend we return to—" "Sit down," Mr. Avery said. Vincent hesitated, stunned by the directness. I said, "Sit." Reluctantly, Vincent sat on the edge of one of the leather chairs near the corner of the lounge. His polished shoes tapped nervously against the marble tile. Mr. Avery turned to the rest of the room. "Today I asked for this meeting not because of what I've heard, but because of what I've seen. I came unannounced for a reason. I wanted to know if the place I built still lived up to its founding values, and instead, I watched the CEO of my own brand spit at a man who showed more grace and patience than I've seen in a boardroom in a decade." A wave of murmurs swept through the staff. Several looked at the ground. He looked again at Keanu. "You had every right to walk out, every reason to retaliate. But you stayed, for someone else." Keanu finally spoke. "I don't think kindness should be situational. You either live by it, or you don't." Mr. Avery's face softened. "That," he said, "is what this place has been missing." He turned to Mia. "You, what's your name?" "Mia Carter, sir," she said quietly. "You knew who he was the moment he walked in, didn't you?" She nodded. "Why didn't you speak?" "My supervisor stopped me. Said it wasn't my place." Mr. Avery gave a slight nod. "It was." He looked across the room. "If we ever make kindness feel like disobedience, we've failed. I want every staff member here to listen very carefully. This is not about celebrity. This is about humanity." He turned to Vincent. "You'll remain seated, and you'll remain silent, because as of this moment you no longer speak for this floor." "I do." Vincent opened his mouth slightly, but no sound came out. Mr. Avery turned back to Keanu. "Would you join me in my office, Mr. Reeves? I believe you and I have a few things to discuss." Keanu nodded. "If it's okay, I'd like my friend Julian to come too." Mr. Avery smiled faintly. "That would be more than okay." As the three men left the lounge, the room remained silent. The staff stood motionless, still processing what they had just witnessed. And at the back of the room, the surveillance cameras kept rolling, catching the moment the dealership's true leadership returned, not with power, but with principle. The private office of Mr. Roland Avery was quiet and spare. Not a single gold plaque or framed press article lined the walls. Just a few black and white photos of old factory floors, handwritten letters from early customers, and a worn photo of his late wife smiling under cherry blossoms. He kept it right beside the window, where the light always reached. Keanu stood near the window while Julian remained respectfully by the door. Mr. Avery motioned for them both to sit. "I owe you a thank you, Mr. Reeves," Mr. Avery said. Keanu shook his head. "You don't." "Yes," the old man insisted. "I do, and it's not just for today." He paused, glancing at the photo by the window. "Do you remember Tokyo, 21 years ago? Yoyogi Park?" Keanu thought for a moment, then looked up. "A woman collapsed near the koi pond." Mr. Avery nodded. "That was my wife, Olivia. She had a heart arrhythmia, undiagnosed at the time. We were on vacation and I was just a few feet away, but I didn't notice. You were the first to reach her." Keanu's expression softened. "She wore a navy scarf." Mr. Avery's eyes glistened. "Yes. You stayed with her until the ambulance came. You left before I could thank you, but I never forgot." Keanu said nothing. Julian looked over at him, wide-eyed. Keanu had never mentioned anything like that before. "I followed your career after that," Mr. Avery continued, "not because you were famous, but because I wanted to see if the man I met in that park was who he seemed to be." Keanu shifted in his seat. "I've made mistakes. but I try to keep my feet on the ground." Mr. Avery smiled. "That's all any of us can do. But today, you reminded me why I started this company in the first place. Not to build cars, but to build respect. And somewhere along the way, we lost it." Julian nodded slowly, holding the folder in his lap. Mr. Avery turned serious. "I want you both to stay here while I address the team again. There's one more thing that needs to happen, and it will happen publicly." Keanu looked concerned. "This isn't about me. I'm not here to make a point." Mr. Avery replied, "You don't need to. The point already made itself." He pressed a button on his desk intercom. "Have the security team prepare the playback footage from today. Display it on the main showroom monitors. Every camera angle, starting from 10 minutes before Mr. Reeves entered the building." The assistant on the other end responded with a quick confirmation. And just like that, the reckoning began. Back in the main lounge, the staff were still gathered, murmuring in low tones, unsure whether to stay or return to their duties. Vincent had remained seated, arms crossed, his mouth a thin line of impatience. He assumed Mr. Avery's emotional speech had been the finale. He expected to be reprimanded, maybe given a warning, then reinstated with a slap on the wrist and another cup of imported espresso. But the sudden flicker of light on the central showroom monitors shifted everything. Every screen came alive at once. The elegant promotional footage of cars gliding through Italian hills disappeared, replaced by a time-stamped video feed. A wide-angle shot from the main entrance began to play in silence. Vincent stood slowly. "What's this?" he asked, his voice tight. The receptionist stepped away from her desk. Mia stared at the screen, heart thudding in her chest. She had never seen Avery use the cameras this way before. Then the footage began. Keanu entered the dealership, quiet and unnoticed. He waited calmly by the wall, hands in his hoodie pockets, speaking to no one. The receptionist motioned toward the exit, and Keanu nodded politely and stepped back outside. The angle switched, another view from above the entry. It showed Vincent speaking to his assistant, pointing toward the door. Then the lobby camera showed Vincent walking toward Keanu, his posture sharp, his tone clearly confrontational, even without audio. The room began to shift. People leaned forward. Expressions changed. Then came the footage of the spitting. The silence in the lounge became suffocating. No one moved. No one looked at Vincent. The moment froze on screen. His head tilted down, his lips pursed, the arc of the spit landing inches from Keanu's boots. The footage paused. Vincent stepped forward quickly, trying to compose himself. "This is completely out of context," he said. "I was provoked. I thought the man was trespassing." The screen changed again. Audio kicked in. From the camera nearest the phantom, the sound of Vincent's voice filled the room. Washed-up actor trying to get attention. "You don't belong here." It played again, and again. No one spoke. Even the interns stood frozen. Vincent's face turned white. He looked toward the receptionist, then toward Mia, then toward the security office at the end of the hall. The final clip rolled. A rear angle from the lot. Keanu opening the door for Julian, helping him into the test car, smiling, laughing quietly. No bitterness, no retaliation. Just two friends on a quiet errand. When the footage stopped, the room remained still. Mr. Avery's voice came through the overhead speakers, calm and steady. "I think that tells the story better than I ever could." The silence that followed was not empty. It was judgment. Vincent stood motionless, the edges of his jaw tightening as he scanned the room for any sign of support. But none came. The staff, who once nodded politely at his presence, now stared down at the floor or looked away entirely. Even the other managers kept their arms folded and eyes averted. Only Mia raised her head, and she didn't look away. She didn't blink. Her gaze was firm, not angry, just resolute. And Vincent felt it more than any word she could have spoken. Then the doors to Mr. Avery's office opened. Keanu walked out first, followed by Julian. Mr. Avery came last, wheeled forward by his assistant with quiet dignity. As he approached the center of the lounge, the crowd instinctively moved aside, creating a clear circle of space without a single word being spoken. Mr. Avery's voice was low, but no one missed a syllable. Every company will face a moment when it must decide whether it stands for its values or hides behind its profits. He looked at Vincent. Today, we faced ours. Vincent cleared his throat. Sir, I'd like the opportunity to explain my side in detail. I believe some of the staff... Mr. Avery cut him off. No more explanations. You had every chance to treat people with dignity. And what you did today, in full view of our employees, customers, and systems, was not a mistake. It was a reflection. Vincent's voice dropped. A reflection of what? Of who you truly are, Mr. Avery said. The old man turned slightly in his chair and nodded to his assistant. She pulled a document from her bag and handed it to Vincent. He opened it and read the top line. His name, and beneath it the words, termination of employment, effective immediately. He blinked. You're firing me? Mr. Avery nodded. I'm preserving this company. Vincent opened his mouth again, but closed it. He looked at Keanu for the first time, really looked at him, and saw nothing but quiet stillness. Keanu didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He simply met Vincent's eyes with the same grace he'd shown from the moment he entered the building. Mr. Avery gestured toward the side exit. Security will escort you to your car. You may collect your things later this week. I suggest you leave with whatever dignity you have left. Vincent swallowed hard and walked out without another word. No one clapped. No one cheered. They just watched him disappear. Mr. Avery turned back to the group. Let this be a turning point, not a punishment. From this day forward, our floor belongs to those who walk with kindness first. Every visitor, every client, every team member. He looked to Keanu. And sometimes the people we try to ignore are the very ones holding us together. 10 minutes passed. That's all it took. 10 minutes from the final frame of the video footage to the moment Vincent Harrington was officially removed from the floor. The tension in the showroom had shifted, not violently, not with yelling or raised voices, but with a quiet gravity that pulled everyone's focus to a new center of gravity: character over position. For the first time in months, the staff stood not in fear of a title, but in awe of something far more rare: principle. Vincent stood near the edge of the lounge, his face drained of color. The document in his hands now hung limply at his side. He stared at the floor, as if hoping it might open up and swallow him whole. Mr. Avery didn't look away. He stood with the full weight of decades behind him and spoke clearly, not just to Vincent, but to everyone in the room. This decision is not because he insulted a celebrity, he said. Let me be clear. Mr. Reeves' fame has nothing to do with this. The crowd leaned in. It's because he insulted a human being, a guest, a man who came here with grace and humility and was treated like a trespasser. That is not the Rolls Royce standard, and it never will be. A soft ripple of applause began. Not loud, not dramatic, but pure. Mia clapped first, then the receptionist, then 2 more employees. Within seconds, nearly everyone joined in, filling the lounge with a quiet but unmistakable affirmation. It wasn't a celebration of punishment. It was a recognition of correction. Keanu didn't clap. He simply stood by Julian, calm as ever, eyes lowered slightly. Vincent looked up and met Keanu's eyes one final time. Keanu took a small step forward, not to provoke, but to speak. He leaned in, close enough that only Vincent could hear him. You never know who you're really talking to, Keanu said softly. So talk to everyone like they matter. Vincent didn't respond. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His shoulders fell, just enough to show the weight finally settling in. The two security officers who had been standing silently near the corner now stepped forward. Vincent gave them a brief nod. No resistance, no speech. He walked between them, out the side hallway, and out of sight. Silence returned to the room. Mr. Avery looked to Keanu. "I believe your friend has paperwork to finish?" Keanu gave a slight bow of his head. "Thank you," he said. Julian exhaled for the first time in minutes. "Man, that was..." Keanu smiled gently. "Bigger than a car, huh?" Julian nodded. "Way bigger." As the crowd began to disperse, Mia hesitated near the front desk. She glanced toward Keanu, then took a deep breath and approached. Her steps were slow, careful, like she wasn't sure if she even deserved to speak. Keanu turned before she reached him. He had already noticed her. He offered a quiet smile that made her stop in her tracks. She started, then stopped, her voice shaking. "I wanted to say, thank you." Keanu raised an eyebrow, gently. "For what?" "For how you handled everything," she said, her voice low. "For not raising your voice, for not letting it get ugly. Most people would have..." He nodded slightly. "But what would it have changed?" She swallowed. "You reminded me that strength doesn't have to shout, that it can be silent. And I didn't speak up when I should have. I let my fear of losing this internship get in the way of what I knew was right." Keanu looked at her, thoughtful. "Mia, right?" She nodded. "You saw the truth," he said. "Even if you didn't say it loud at the time, you carried it. That matters. Don't lose that." Her voice cracked. "My mom, she always said integrity is rarer than diamonds. She used to say, people may forget your name, but they'll remember your spine." Keanu's smile deepened. "She's right," he said. "And if she's anything like you, I'm not surprised." Tears welled in Mia's eyes. She quickly wiped one away and straightened her shoulders. "Thank you for seeing me." Keanu placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Keep standing up, even when your voice shakes." She nodded again and stepped back, heart pounding but lighter somehow. At the reception desk, the receptionist gave her a long, unreadable look. Then she reached into her drawer and pulled out a small envelope. She handed it to Mia without a word. Inside was a handwritten note from Mr. Avery. It read, "This place is yours to shape now. Don't wait for permission." In the showroom, Julian was finalizing the last details of his purchase. Derek had returned with a fresh agreement and was walking him through each line item, carefully and respectfully. The energy had changed. It wasn't about the sale anymore. It was about respect. Keanu stood nearby, watching quietly. He didn't need to interfere. Julian was standing tall now, speaking clearly, asking questions. The hesitation in his voice was gone. Mia walked back to her desk and sat down, still holding the note. She looked over at Keanu one more time. He didn't look like a star. He looked like a reminder. And for the first time since she'd started working there, the showroom didn't feel heavy, and it felt honest. Julian walked out of the finance office holding a slim envelope and the keys to his new car. His steps were slow, almost reverent, as though he couldn't quite believe the moment was real. Keanu met him halfway, clapping a gentle hand on his back. "You did it," Keanu said. Julian shook his head. "We did it." Derek joined them and extended his hand. "Mr. Rodriguez, your Phantom will be detailed and delivered by morning. If you'd like, we can schedule your first service at a location closer to home." Julian chuckled, overwhelmed. "Man, I never thought I'd hear someone say those words to me." Derek smiled. "You earned it." Julian turned to Keanu. "Can I ask you something? Why didn't you just tell them who you were?" Keanu took a moment before answering. "Because if respect depends on recognition, it's not real respect." Julian nodded slowly. "I get that now." They began to walk toward the exit together. Mia stood and gave a small wave. Julian smiled and nodded in return. The kind of nod people exchange when they've seen something bigger than themselves unfold. As they reached the glass doors, Keanu paused and looked back over the showroom. The staff had returned to their posts, but everything felt different. Lighter. Still professional, still polished, but warmer. The silence that had once felt like surveillance now felt like reverence. A kind of stillness born from truth being seen, not hidden. Mr. Avery sat in his wheelchair near the edge of the lounge, speaking softly with two of his senior staff. He caught Keanu's glance and gave a respectful nod. Keanu returned it with a slight bow. The door opened with a hiss, and fresh air rolled in. Julian looked at Keanu as they stepped into the fading light. "You think it'll stick? The change?" Keanu breathed in. "If it reached the right people, it will." Julian turned the Phantom's keys over in his hand. "Never imagined a day like this." Keanu grinned. "Neither did the man who spat at me." Julian laughed, shaking his head. "I'll never forget that." Keanu grew thoughtful. "I hope you remember everything else instead. The dignity, the choice not to retaliate, the woman who wanted to speak up. That's the real story." Julian was quiet a moment, then said, "Thank you, Keanu." Keanu looked up at the sky. The sun had started to set, the last rays painting the edge of the building's gold. "Don't thank me," he said, "just pass it on." Together they stepped off the dealership steps and into the quiet street. Inside, behind the glass, the floor belonged to someone else now. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like everyone was finally standing on solid ground. The first video went online just 2 hours later. A customer, seated in the waiting area during the incident, had filmed part of the confrontation, just enough to catch Vincent's raised voice, his demeaning words, and the instant the security footage was played in front of the staff. The short clip, shaky but clear, showed the dealership CEO being called out by the founder, followed by the unmistakable presence of Keanu Reeves, quietly standing near the back, saying almost nothing. The video was captioned, "CEO spits on man at Rolls Royce, guess who he was talking to?" Within an hour, it hit 1 million views. By nightfall, the headlines began. CEO fired for spitting on customer. Turns out it was Keanu Reeves. Humility versus arrogance. Keanu takes the high road in shocking luxury car incident. Rolls-Royce exec publicly disgraces himself, then this actor silently sets things right. Keanu's name trended across platforms, not because of a scandal, but because of his silence, his poise, and the grace with which he handled humiliation. News anchors replayed the footage. Commentators debated the ethics of class, power, and how often working-class people are judged based on appearances. Celebrities tweeted support. Athletes praised the moment. A well-known business author posted, "This is how you build influence, without raising your voice." Still, Keanu said nothing. No interviews, no statements, no comment. Just one message, posted to his account that evening, typed in plain white text on a black background. Kindness cost nothing. It was shared over 8 million times in the first 12 hours. In the comments, thousands of users recounted their own moments of being dismissed, talked down to, or underestimated. A woman wrote about being mocked in a luxury store while shopping for her father's retirement gift. A teenage boy shared how he was ignored at a dealership when looking for a used car for his mom. The flood of voices all pointed back to one central truth: that the way people treat others when no one is watching reveals everything. And now, thanks to surveillance footage and one quietly recorded customer video, the world had been watching. Meanwhile, inside the corporate headquarters of the dealership chain, Mr. Avery was already at work. Within 24 hours, he issued a company-weighted memo. It read, "We will no longer allow titles to shield behavior. Effective immediately, every branch will undergo an audit of customer experience, staff treatment, and leadership culture. Our standard is no longer appearance, it is action." A team of integrity officers was assembled, not just lawyers or HR representatives, but long-standing employees, customer advocates, and even junior staff like Mia were invited to contribute. Mia couldn't believe it when she received the invitation. An internal email marked Urgent Confidential had landed in her inbox late that evening. The subject line read, Integrity Review Committee, Initial Session Request. Below it, the message was simple. You have been recommended for input. Your perspective matters. She stared at the screen, stunned. No supervisor had ever asked her opinion on anything before. But now, her voice was being requested. At the top. She took a screenshot and texted it to her mother. Seconds later, a message came back. I'm proud of you. Speak clearly. They need to hear people like you. At the same time, across Los Angeles, dealership managers received a very different message. Every store leader was asked to submit anonymous testimonials from employees and customers about management behavior. The company wanted to know what had been tolerated and who had felt silenced. Inside the boardroom, Mr. Avery was already preparing a speech to deliver at the quarterly meeting. It wouldn't be about growth metrics or luxury trends. It would be about people. Across social media, the public reaction was still building. Influencers and activists praised Keanu's restraint. A high school teacher posted a video using the story to teach students about the difference between power and authority. The clip gained millions of views, especially after she quoted Keanu's statement at the end of her lesson. Kindness costs nothing. Luxury publications wrote editorials about the Keanu standard. They debated what it meant to value service and humility in an industry built on exclusivity. The discussion expanded beyond cars. It became a conversation about boardrooms, businesses, and basic decency. Inside the original dealership, Derek and the other sales staff noticed the change immediately. Customers came in asking not just about vehicles, but about values. One man shook Derek's hand and said, I'm here because of how your staff stood by a good man. That tells me more than the badge on the hood. Even the service team felt it. One mechanic said, I've worked in that garage 5 years. First time anyone ever looked me in the eye and asked my name was yesterday. Meanwhile, Vincent Harrington's silence became its own statement. He'd deleted his social media accounts. A brief message from his legal team said he would not be making public comments. But people weren't asking to hear from him. They had already heard enough, and they had seen everything they needed to know. The footage had done what no press release could. It told the truth without filters. And the truth had found its audience. 3 days later, the story was still everywhere. Morning shows replayed the footage frame by frame, breaking down Keanu's silence like it was strategy. Podcasts praised Mr. Avery's leadership, calling it a masterclass in executive accountability. Editorials compared Keanu's quiet dignity to the tone-deaf responses of other public figures in recent scandals. But Keanu stayed out of the spotlight. He declined interviews. He turned down talk show appearances. He ignored offers from news anchors eager to sit with him. Instead, he donated, quietly, to 2 employee support foundations tied to auto workers and service staff. He also sent an anonymous donation to a small hospital in rural Oregon, the same one Mia's mother had once received treatment at. The only thing he did publicly was post one more message. It was a single sentence, typed at midnight and shared without hashtags or branding. Respect should never be something you earn by wearing a suit. It was reposted by celebrities, CEOs, and even a former president. Meanwhile, the internal changes at the dealership chain began taking root. Mr. Avery created a new policy. Every new hire, no matter the role, would watch the full video during orientation. Not to embarrass anyone, but to remind every employee what the brand truly stood for. Julian's story became legend within the company. His photo, standing beside his Phantom, keys in hand, wearing his mechanic's shirt with pride, was featured on the company's internal newsletter under the headline, What It Means to Serve with Honor. But Julian never asked for attention. He went back to his garage the next day and got back to work. When a neighbor stopped him and said, "You're the guy from that Rolls Royce video, right?" He just smiled and said, "I'm the guy who got lucky and had a good friend." And in truth, that friend had become something more. Keanu's decision not to respond with anger, not to demand anything, had left a deeper mark than any public confrontation could have. It taught a lesson that lived longer than headlines. It taught people to look again at the man in the hoodie holding the door, at the receptionist they passed without greeting, at the intern who wanted to speak but didn't yet feel safe. The world saw something rare, not just a scandal but a mirror. And in that reflection, people didn't just see Keanu Reeves. They saw themselves and asked, quietly, who they wanted to be. Julian was halfway through rotating tires on an old SUV when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He wiped his hands on a rag, pulled it out, and saw a message from a number he didn't recognize. "Julian Rodriguez, this is Roland Avery's assistant. Mr. Avery would like to see you today. If you're available, a driver can be at your shop in 20 minutes. Julian read it twice, stunned. He looked over at his boss, who was leaning against a stack of brake rotors, sipping coffee. "Hey, Tony," Julian called out. "I think I've been summoned." Tony chuckled. "You win the lottery or something?" "Kind of," Julian said. "I think I just got called back to Rolls Royce." An hour later, Julian walked through the showroom doors for the second time that week, this time in his work clothes, grease on his sleeves, a slight limp from years on concrete floors. But no one batted an eye. Mia greeted him with a smile and a handshake. "Mr. Avery is expecting you." They walked past rows of polished hoods and silent chrome emblems. The same hallway that once felt like a gallery of glass now felt human, familiar. Inside the founder's office, Mr. Avery looked up from his desk and smiled warmly. "Mr. Rodriguez, thank you for coming." Julian shook his head. "No, thank you, sir. I'm still wrapping my head around everything." Mr. Avery gestured for him to sit. "Then let me add something more for you to wrap your head around." He slid a folder across the desk. Julian opened it. It wasn't another invoice. It was a revised sales agreement. The total price of the Phantom had been slashed nearly in half. Below it, in bold print, were the words, "Lifetime maintenance included at any certified location." Julian's hands trembled. "Sir, I can't accept this. It's too much." Mr. Avery leaned forward. "You didn't ask for it, and that's why you deserve it." Julian looked up, eyes wet. "I'm just a guy with a wrench." "You're a man who showed the world what humility looks like," Mr. Avery said. "That's the rarest thing we can put behind the wheel of our cars." Julian tried to speak, but nothing came out. In the corner of the office, leaning against the window with his hood still up, was Keanu. He hadn't said a word. Julian looked over. "You knew about this?" Keanu gave a small smile. "I hoped for it. But why? Why me?" Keanu pushed off the wall and walked closer. "Because this isn't about cars. It's about value. Real value. What you build with your hands, how you treat people when no one's looking. That's worth more than leather seats or V12 engines." Julian wiped his eyes with the back of his wrist. "I don't know what to say." "You already said it," Keanu replied, "when you walked in the first time and didn't run." Mr. Avery nodded. "That, right there, is how the standard shifts." Julian stood there for a long moment, the weight of it all sitting in his chest like something sacred. The room was quiet, but nothing about the silence felt empty. Keanu sat in the guest chair beside him now, relaxed, legs crossed, like a friend just hanging out. But Julian knew that none of this, none of what had unfolded over the past few days, would have happened without him. Mr. Avery spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "This is not a handout, it's a correction. We're not giving you anything, we're recognizing what should have been seen from the beginning." Julian nodded slowly. "You know, I used to dream about owning a car like this. Not because of the badge, but because of what it represented to me. Not money, not power, just proof that I'd made it through. Keanu leaned forward. And you did. Julian looked down at the contract again. I fixed so many people's cars, bent over broken engines in freezing garages, working until my hands went numb. But this is the first time someone said I mattered without asking me to prove it first. He paused, swallowing hard. Thank you. Mr. Avery smiled. You earned this moment. Then Keanu turned slightly, as if something inside him stirred. You know, he said, I've told people before that I learn the most about life on movie sets, not from the directors or producers, but from the people who clean the floors and reset the chairs. Julian looked curious. Like who? Keanu's eyes drifted to a spot in the distance only he could see. There was a janitor on my first set. Name was Mike. Everyone ignored him. But he knew everyone's name. He used to say, it's not the frame that matters, it's what you bring into it. I watched him carry himself like his job meant something, because it did. And that taught me everything. Julian sat back, thinking about that. Mr. Avery said, most people believe character shows in the big moments, but I've found it's in the smallest ones. Like how you treated our staff, how you never once raised your voice. That tells me everything I need to know. They stood together. The contract was signed, the papers sealed. But what had been built in that office wasn't just a deal. It was a new foundation. As they walked back out to the showroom, Julian noticed employees smiling at him, not with pity or polite smiles, but respect. He passed Mia near the reception desk, and she gave him a thumbs up that felt like a hug. Keanu walked a few steps behind, quiet, as always. Julian turned back once before reaching the door. Hey, Keanu, he said. You ever think about buying one of these yourself? Keanu smirked. Nah, I think I'm good riding shotgun for now. They both laughed. And with that, the mechanic who once questioned if he belonged walked out a customer. Finally seen, finally valued. 3 days after Vincent Harrington was removed from his post, a handwritten envelope arrived at Keanu's production office. There was no return address, just his name, in careful cursive, and the seal of the U.S. Navy pressed into a simple wax circle on the back. Keanu opened it slowly. Inside was a letter written on cream-colored stationery, the penmanship deliberate and slightly weathered. The signature at the bottom read, Colonel James Harrington, retired. The words were not defensive. They weren't laced with denial or shame. They were honest. Mr. Reeves, you don't know me, but I'm the father of the man who embarrassed himself and our family inside that dealership. I've watched the footage. I've read the statements. I've seen the way you handled something that would have broken lesser men. I raised my son to stand tall, serve others, and never look down on the hands that build what he enjoys. Somewhere along the way he lost that. Maybe I did too. Maybe I should have spoken up more when I saw the signs. What you did wasn't just noble. It was necessary. You didn't call him out with force. You called him up with silence. I can't change what he did, but I can thank you for showing us where the true line of respect lies. And I'm sorry for all of it. James. Keanu sat with the letter in his lap for a long time. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel vindicated. He just felt quiet. That evening he wrote back, by hand, Colonel Harrington, thank you for your words. I don't carry resentment, but I do believe in accountability, not the kind that punishes, but the kind that reveals. Your son made a choice, and so did I. Forgiveness is the slowest form of justice, but it's the most permanent. I hope this moment becomes more than regret. I hope it becomes reflection. Respectfully, the letter was never shared online, but a copy of it ended up framed on the wall of Mr. Avery's office. He placed it directly across from the photo of his wife under the cherry blossoms. He told staff, one represents how far we've come, The other reminds us how easily we can lose our way. Across the dealership network, change continued to ripple. One of the first new initiatives was internal promotion based on merit, not title. And the very first to benefit? Mia Carter. She was called into the regional office and offered the role of communications director, overseeing messaging, customer engagement, and internal storytelling for all West Coast branches. She cried when she got the news. Not because of the title, but because she was finally being heard. And her first campaign? She called it Driven by Character. Mia's new campaign began with a single question: what makes someone worthy of luxury? Instead of glossy magazine shots of celebrities and millionaires, the campaign featured stories from people who had never stepped inside a showroom before. People who worked hard, gave back, and carried themselves with dignity, no matter their background. Julian's story was the first one featured. The photo shoot took place inside his small garage. He stood in front of the Phantom, wearing his mechanic uniform. His hands were stained with oil, his sleeves rolled up, and his smile uncertain at first, until Mia cracked a joke about him needing a fan just to deal with the car's detailing. When it came time for the interview, she asked him a simple question: who changed your life? Julian paused. He looked down at his hands, flexed them once, and then said, "A man who never said his name." He didn't elaborate, and he didn't have to. That one line became the headline of the first ad in the campaign. It ran in local papers, on social media, and eventually on the company's website. A man who never said his name. It became a symbol of what Mia called quiet excellence, of the kind of leadership that doesn't need applause to be powerful, of what it meant to change someone's path by simply showing up with integrity. The campaign was an instant success. Customers sent in their own stories. A single mother in Phoenix who saved for 5 years to buy her first car. A retired school principal in Sacramento who bought a used Rolls after volunteering at a homeless shelter for a decade. A Vietnam veteran in San Diego who came in just to look, then left with his dream car after the dealership surprised him with a sponsorship. All of them shared one thing: they were people who weren't expecting recognition, but they deserved it. And behind each new story, the spirit of what Keanu had done lived on, not because he asked for it, but because people couldn't forget it. In a quiet moment, Mia printed one of the campaign posters and walked it down to Mr. Avery's office. She handed it to him, and he studied it for a long time before setting it beside the framed letter from Keanu. He didn't say anything. He just looked proud. At the bottom of the poster, in fine print, Mia had added a line that wasn't approved by marketing, but no one removed it. It said, "Character isn't a requirement to walk through our doors, but it's the reason we hold them open." Keanu never asked to be mentioned, and he never needed to be. The stories themselves had taken the lead, and the world, watching from a distance, started asking different questions. Not just about status, but about worth. Not just about product, but about people. The stage was modest. No velvet curtain, no dramatic lighting, just a clean white backdrop bearing the simple Rolls Royce logo and a row of chairs flanked by 2 polished microphones. But every seat in the room was filled. The press conference had been scheduled quietly, just 48 hours in advance, but word had spread fast. Journalists from every major outlet filled the rows. Cameras were already rolling, microphones clipped to lapels, phones lifted for live streams. People weren't just expecting answers. They were expecting a reckoning. Mr. Roland Avery entered through the side door, wearing a gray wool suit and no tie. He walked with slow dignity, flanked by a small team of leaders from the company's internal review board. To his left was Mia Carter, now freshly titled Communications Director. To his right, a former mechanic who had recently been promoted to Regional Service Advisor. Behind them, silent but present, were a mix of men and women from every level of the organization. The visual message was clear: no more walls between ranks. When Mr. Avery reached the podium, he didn't look at the cameras. He looked at the people. "Thank you for being here," he began. No teleprompter, just paper in his hand and conviction in his voice. "This has been a humbling season for our company. We were forced to confront not just an isolated incident, but a question at the core of who we are. What do we value? And who do we serve?" He paused, letting the weight of that question settle across the room. "I've spent the last few weeks not just watching footage, but reading letters, listening to stories, hearing from employees, customers, and strangers who reminded us that our greatest asset isn't the machines we build, it's the people we serve." He turned a page. An incident occurred in one of our showrooms. A man was disrespected because of how he looked. Not because of anything he said. Not because of what he did. But because someone believed they could measure his worth by his clothing. A murmur passed through the crowd. Mr. Avery lifted his hand slightly. We all saw it. And some of you may know who that man was, but I won't name him today, because his name isn't what made the moment powerful. He looked out across the sea of faces. It was the silence he chose, the grace he showed, the restraint that echoed louder than any outrage. Mia looked down, her hands folded neatly on her lap, but a soft smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "In a world of noise," Mr. Avery said, "some men lead with silence, and they echo forever." There was a pause, and then the room, usually stiff and media-trained, broke into soft applause. Not because they were told to, because it felt right. Mr. Avery waited for the applause to fade before continuing. "Today we are announcing a series of reforms not just for appearances, but for permanence." He listed the changes, one by one. First, we're instituting mandatory empathy training for all senior staff and customer-facing roles, focused not on sales performance, but on human dignity. Second, our promotion structure will now include anonymous peer feedback, so kindness carries the same weight as competence. Third, we're launching a program to highlight customer stories that reflect integrity over income, humility over luxury. He turned to Mia briefly and smiled. Direction. That program will be led by our new communications director, Mia Carter, whose voice and values have already begun to reshape how we speak to the world. Mia nodded modestly, her eyes glistening. "Finally," Mr. Avery said, "we will be establishing a fund for community-based vehicle access, helping working-class professionals, including mechanics, nurses, and teachers, purchase safe, quality vehicles with dignity and without judgment." The crowd murmured again, but this time with warmth. Reporters jotted down notes. A few even lowered their cameras for a moment to simply listen. At the back of the room, standing quietly near the double doors, was Julian Rodriguez. He wore a clean button-up shirt. No press badge, no fanfare. Just the man who had once walked into a dealership unsure if he belonged, now watching as the values he lived by shaped something far bigger than he imagined. He didn't need to be on stage. He didn't want to be. He just smiled, because he knew the truth behind every word. As the press conference came to a close, one reporter finally raised a hand. "Mr. Avery," she asked, "will the man from that incident ever speak publicly?" Mr. Avery looked thoughtful, then smiled faintly. "I wouldn't count on it," he said. "Some people don't need a microphone to be heard." That clip went viral in under an hour. It was reshared with the caption, "Some people don't need a microphone to be heard." The internet exploded again. Not with anger this time, but with gratitude. Thousands commented that the press conference had restored their faith in leadership, in corporate responsibility, in basic decency. But true to form, Keanu said nothing. He watched the footage later that night from a quiet room, sitting alone, hoodie on, cup of tea in hand. He didn't repost it. He didn't like or comment. He just nodded once and turned off the screen. For him, the work had never been about the press or the praise. It had always been about the quiet moments, the ones no camera could capture. The moments where a man could hold his ground without lifting his voice, where truth didn't need to shout to be believed. And outside the conference hall, as people filed into the parking lot, one mechanic got into his Phantom, started the engine, and drove off. Still grounded, still humble, but never again unseen. 6 weeks after the press conference, the first training session launched at the original dealership in Los Angeles. It wasn't about sales techniques or luxury branding. It was about something far more difficult to teach: character. Inside the same showroom where Keanu had once stood silently by his friend, the furniture had been rearranged. Rows of folding chairs now faced a projection screen. The lights were dimmed, and the walls, once lined with sleek marketing posters, now featured framed quotes from employees across the country. And read, "We don't just open doors, we open trust." Another, "If kindness isn't part of the service, it isn't luxury." Employees from across departments, sales, service, reception, and management, filled the chairs. No one sat in the back to hide. The mood wasn't defensive, it was expectant. The training began with a short video. It featured no names, no actors, just real footage, real stories, and real reflections. Clips showed moments from the viral incident, the spit, the silence, the standing ovation. But it wasn't sensationalized. It was instruction. Then came a new segment, testimonials. One clip showed Julian in his garage, talking about what it felt like to be seen after years of being overlooked. Another featured a customer from Detroit who shared how a single smile from a receptionist helped him find the courage to make his first big purchase. And finally, the video ended on Mia. She stood in front of a blank white wall, eyes steady, voice clear. "I didn't speak up that day. I wanted to, but I was afraid. What changed my life wasn't just what I witnessed. It was the moment someone reminded me that silence doesn't have to be final, that I could still choose to act with courage the next time." The lights came back on. Mia stepped up to the front of the room in person. She was the keynote speaker of the first training session. She wore no corporate blazer, just a black shirt, a notepad in hand, and the weight of experience in her voice. "Integrity isn't something we memorize," she said. "It's something we remember. We remember how it feels when we're seen, when we're dismissed, and when we get a second chance." Her words were quiet but carried weight. No one scrolled their phones. No one looked away. Everything changed for me the day someone chose grace over retaliation. That's the model we're building from now on. She closed with a sentence that would later become the program's slogan. "Culture doesn't come from policy, it comes from people." Applause filled the room. But while Mia stood before her peers, leading a new wave of change, Keanu was somewhere else. Not in a press room, not at an award ceremony. He was walking down a pale hallway of a children's hospital on the other side of town, dressed in jeans and a plain shirt, carrying a stack of comic books under one arm. No one had announced his visit. No press release had gone out. There were no photographers, no influencers, no reporters. Just Keanu, walking softly from room to room, stopping where he was invited, sitting where he was welcome. In one room, a boy no older than 8 sat with tubes running from his arms to a monitor beside his bed. His mother looked up when Keanu entered, unsure at first if it was really him, but the boy knew immediately. His face lit up, his voice a whisper. "You're John Wick." Keanu smiled and knelt beside the bed. "Sometimes. But today I'm just Keanu, and I brought you something." He handed the boy a comic book. It wasn't flashy, just one Keanu remembered loving when he was young. They talked for a few minutes, nothing heavy, just heroes and villains and which snacks taste better cold. And then Keanu said something quiet just before he left the room. "You're already braver than any character I've ever played." The boy beamed, and that was it. No cameras, no applause. Just a moment exchanged, given freely, without cost or credit. Back at the dealership, Mia was finishing the session with a Q&A. A technician in the back raised his hand and asked, "What would you say is the biggest thing we have to change?" Mia thought for a moment. "We have to stop assuming we know who someone is based on how they walk through the door. That's the real shift. Not luxury first, humanity first. As the session ended, each attendee received a small pin, just a silver circle engraved with the words, "Character First." It wasn't mandatory to wear, but by the next week, nearly every employee at the Los Angeles location had one on their jacket, collar, or lanyard. The rollout spread. Within 3 months, the Driven by Character training was part of onboarding across all national dealerships. Internal mentorship programs launched, pairing senior staff with junior hires, not to train them in sales, but to mentor them in communication, ethics, and humility. Former service employees were asked to advise on policy. Customer complaints weren't just logged, they were listened to in monthly roundtables. Even anonymous employee submissions were read aloud in executive meetings. The change wasn't fast, but it was real. And while all of this unfolded, Keanu remained exactly where he always had been, on the edge of the story, present but never demanding attention, a part of the change but never the brand of it. One morning, Mr. Avery found an envelope on his desk. Inside was a single line written in Keanu's familiar handwriting. "It's not what you drive, it's who you carry." Mr. Avery smiled and pinned the note to his bulletin board. And outside, in showrooms across the country, staff began showing up a little earlier, listening a little longer, choosing empathy before assumptions. Because greatness doesn't announce itself. It simply shows up, and leave the door open behind it. 6 months had passed. The headlines were gone. The online debates had quieted. But Vincent Harrington had not forgotten. He now lived in a modest apartment above a strip of small businesses in Sacramento. Gone were the tailored suits and glass-walled offices. These days he wore polo shirts with a plastic name tag and spent most of his time handing over keys to compact cars in a budget rental office near the train station. The branch was small. 1 manager, 2 part-time attendants, a coffee machine that barely worked. Vincent didn't mind. He arrived on time, did his paperwork, cleaned the windshields when needed. He kept to himself. Most people who came in didn't recognize him, and that suited him fine. When someone did, they would occasionally ask, "Weren't you that guy?" Vincent would just nod and change the subject. But every so often, late at night when the office was quiet, he would scroll through the news archives on his phone. The story would still appear. The viral video, the transcript of Mr. Avery's press conference, the reposts of Keanu's quote. He never clicked on them. He didn't need to. He remembered every frame. There were no more CEOs calling. No job offers from big-name firms. The silence that followed his public fall had been deafening at first. Now, it was just the hum beneath his new life. One evening in early autumn, Vincent was walking home from the night shift. He'd closed up, turned off the lights, and stepped out into the chill of the city air. The streets were quiet, except for the soft hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. He passed a narrow alley where the dumpsters were lined up. Near the back, beside a stack of flattened cardboard boxes, sat a man in a threadbare coat, wrapped in a blanket that barely covered his knees. He was older, beard unkempt, skin weathered from the street. Vincent slowed. He'd seen the man before, sometimes sitting behind the cafe near the rental lot, head down, never asking for anything, just existing. But tonight, something was different. A group of teenagers passed by, loud, careless. One of them tossed a soda cup toward the man. It missed, but the ice spilled near his feet. Another laughed. "Get a job, Grandpa," one of them shouted, before disappearing into the streetlight. Vincent's jaw tensed. He hesitated only a second before turning around. He walked toward the man, knelt beside him, and began picking up the spilled ice and trash. "You okay?" Vincent asked softly. The man nodded, unsure, startled. Vincent stood and looked down the street, where the teens had gone. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a $10 bill, pressing it into the man's hand. "It's not much," he said, "but there's a diner a block over. Open late. Get something hot." The man's eyes glistened, but he didn't speak. Vincent didn't stay. He just nodded once and walked on. It was a small moment. No cameras, no applause. But for Vincent, it mattered. Later that night, Vincent sat at his small kitchen table, the overhead light buzzing faintly. A bowl of instant noodles sat untouched beside a spiral notebook he had opened weeks ago but never written in. He finally picked up a pen. At first, the ink stalled. Then, slowly, he wrote the date at the top of the page. Beneath it, he scribbled, "I thought I was leading a brand. I never learned how to lead myself." He stared at the sentence for a while, then continued, "That day in Los Angeles, I believed I was defending the company. I thought image was everything. I thought respect came from wearing the most expensive tie in the room. I thought kindness was weakness. I thought silence was inferiority." His handwriting got smaller as he kept going, but I watched a man who could have ruined me choose not to. I saw a room shift its loyalty, not because of a headline, but because of how someone made them feel. He didn't fight back, he didn't raise his voice, and that's what made it unforgettable. He stopped. The pen hovered in the air. Then he wrote one last line. "That's what I missed, the echo of grace." He closed the notebook. The next morning, Vincent showed up early at work. He wiped down the counters before anyone arrived. He replaced the coffee filter. He straightened the chairs in the waiting area and restocked the complimentary water bottles. As the door opened and the first customer walked in, Vincent smiled, not out of obligation, but because it felt right. That evening, he walked past the same alley again. The man was gone, but a small note was taped to the wall with duct tape. It read, "Thank you. I ate warm." Vincent folded the paper, tucked it into his coat pocket, and continued walking. It was the first time in months that his shoulders didn't feel so heavy. People didn't see him as a villain anymore. Most didn't see him at all. But maybe that was the point. Growth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's a quiet refusal to repeat yesterday's mistake. That night, he didn't scroll through the old headlines. Instead, he reopened the notebook. This time not to reflect, but to plan. The first page of a new chapter simply read, "Kindness is a discipline. I'm learning." The rest of the pages were blank and waiting. In a quiet corner of Mr. Avery's study, behind a paneled cabinet, sat a locked drawer. He hadn't opened it in years, not because he forgot what was inside, but because the contents were too personal, too raw, and too humbling. That morning, he unlocked it. Inside were old documents, photographs, a faded folder labeled Hope Foundation 2004, and a folded letter. The Hope Foundation had been the passion project of his late wife, Eleanor. She had founded the charity after her own battle with ovarian cancer, determined to provide financial assistance for underfunded women's clinics across the West Coast. For 5 years it had flourished, until one brutal quarter. A corporate partner unexpectedly pulled out days before a gala fundraiser. The budget collapsed, the board panicked, Eleanor was devastated. The hospital wing she'd promised funding for was at risk of shutting down before it ever opened. Mr. Avery had reached out to everyone, business partners, donors, even personal friends. Most offered sympathy. None had the funds. And then, without warning, a check arrived. Not from a foundation, not from a firm, just a personal check for the exact amount of the shortfall. No cover letter, no grand explanation, only a note clipped to the top that read, "For Eleanor. You helped my mother once. Let me return the favor." He was signed simply, KR. At first, Avery hadn't connected the initials. It wasn't until Eleanor recalled the story, weeks later, that it clicked. 10 years earlier, while traveling in Japan, Eleanor had fainted in a park due to heatstroke. A young man jogging nearby had helped her to a shaded bench, bought her a bottle of water, and waited until paramedics arrived. She had never forgotten his kindness, or the calm way he stayed by her side without asking for anything. She didn't know his name until later that night, when the hotel concierge said, "That was Keanu Reeves." They had never crossed paths again. Until the donation. Avery had wanted to thank him publicly, hold a press conference, announce the gesture. Keanu declined. He asked only that the funds be used as promised and that no one be told. And so, Avery had honored that wish. He kept the letter, the check stub, and the clipped note in the drawer. He never spoke of it again. Until now. Back at the dealership, in the aftermath of the press storm, Avery had stood by his decisions, proud of the culture shift underway. But part of him still wrestled with the depth of Keanu's impact. Not just that day, but across decades. It wasn't just a celebrity stepping into injustice. It was a man who had lived by principle when no one was watching. That was the real story. And it haunted Avery, in a good way. He picked up the letter again, ran his fingers over the handwritten note, and smiled softly. Then he placed it in a new frame. He carried it to his office at the dealership. It now sat behind his desk. Not for visitors, but for himself. A reminder of the difference one quiet act could make, even across 20 years. That same afternoon, Mia knocked gently on Mr. Avery's office door. He motioned for her to come in. She had just finished another ethics session, guiding junior staff through a module on unconscious bias and leadership accountability. Her voice had shaken slightly when quoting one of the key values in the manual: honor the unseen efforts. Mia noticed the new frame behind Mr. Avery's desk. "Is that Keanu's handwriting?" she asked softly. Mr. Avery nodded. "Hell didn't want anyone to know," he said. "But I think it's time we understood why this place still stands." He didn't elaborate. But his eyes were distant, remembering. Later that week, the dealership quietly began a mentorship fund under Eleanor Avery's name. No press release, no banners. Just a quiet change in policy. Employees could nominate others, regardless of title, to receive personal development grants for education or family emergencies. Julian, the mechanic, nominated his apprentice, a single father taking night classes in electrical engineering. Mia, when asked to nominate someone, chose the janitor who had covered her shifts when her mother fell ill years ago. No one ever mentioned Keanu's name, but everyone felt his presence, in ways they didn't fully understand. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, Keanu stood on the rooftop of a small art school he'd helped fund years earlier. He wasn't listed on the board, and his name didn't appear on the donor wall. He came by to check the new elevator that had been installed for wheelchair access. The director offered to name the elevator after him. Keanu smiled and said no. He just wanted to make sure it worked. When the director asked why he continued giving without ever taking credit, Keanu shrugged. "Because legacy isn't a statue," he said. "It's the weight of what we leave behind, on people's hearts." That sentence stayed with the director for weeks, and eventually it made its way into a graduation speech delivered by a young artist who had once lived in a shelter, now thriving because of the school's scholarship program. The impact of one man's quiet choices rippled outward, into hallways, into careers, into stories that would never make headlines. Back at the dealership, Mr. Avery finally drafted a private letter to Keanu. In it, he wrote, "What happened at the dealership wasn't your first act of grace. It was just the first the world saw. The rest was always there. I hope someday the world learns that greatness isn't in what we achieve, but in what we choose not to announce." He didn't send the letter. He placed it beside the frame in his office, under glass, where it would remain. A silent tribute, a reminder that some hands shape the world not with noise or might, but with restraint, humility, and conviction. Legacy, it turns out, isn't built in public. It's shaped in the moments no one sees. The morning light in Julian's modest garage spilled across the concrete floor, catching the corner of a weathered red toolbox and a rust-stained creeper. The smell of oil and sawdust hung in the air like an old friend. He had just flipped the open sign when the mailman waved a small envelope at him from the other side of the chain-link gate. "Special delivery," the mailman called out with a grin. "No return address." Julian wiped his hands and took it, turning it over in curiosity. His name was written in careful, blocky letters. No postage. Someone had dropped it off personally. He tore it open, and a small card fell into his palm. It was a hand-drawn sketch. His garage. Down to the detail, the crooked sign, the dent in the side panel of the door, even the little cactus pot he kept on the windowsill. Below the sketch, just 2 initials. K. Julian blinked. He turned the envelope upside down again. A tiny square box slipped into his hand. Inside it was a perfect miniature model of the Rolls Royce he'd bought. But it wasn't just a display car. This one was custom, painted to match the exact color of his own, with the same tire rims and a small detail that made his breath hitch. A tiny brass plaque was mounted on the model's base. It read, "Built by hands, driven by heart." Julian sat down on the stool next to his workbench. For a long time, he didn't move. That phrase wasn't about a car. It was about him. He looked up at the old photograph of his father on the wall, young in his mechanic's uniform, covered in grease, with a smile that looked like it belonged on Julian's face. He gently placed the model beneath the photo, then stepped back. It looked like it belonged there. That afternoon, Mia showed up at the garage, her hair pulled into a loose braid, clipboard under one arm. She had been visiting customers featured in the new Kindness Drives Us campaign, real people, not actors, sharing real stories of compassion. Julian greeted her with a nod and offered her a seat on an overturned bucket. She laughed and sat, not even noticing the motor oil smear on her jeans. When she saw the model car mounted beneath the photograph, she paused. "Is that from Keanu?" Julian didn't answer right away. He finally said. He never said, but no one else would have known that was my dad. Mia smiled gently. "We're featuring stories next month, highlighting the people behind the wheel, mechanics, janitors, teachers. I'd love to interview you, film the shop, tell the world." Julian looked at the model car, then at the sketch still tucked into the envelope on his bench. "I'm honored," he said. "But no." She tilted her head. "Can I ask why?" He nodded. "Some stories don't need to be told," he said quietly, "but they need to be lived." Mia didn't argue. She simply nodded, writing something down anyway. Mia stood up, holding her clipboard loosely in one hand. Julian remained quiet for a few moments, staring at the little model, the plaque beneath it glinting in the dim light. "Keanu really knows how to make an impact, doesn't he?" Mia said, breaking the silence. Julian's smile was faint, but it held a deep truth. More than that, he makes people see what's really important. Not the cars, not the fame, but the hands that build and the hearts that drive them. She watched him for a while, sensing the depth in his words, the quiet humility that came with the story he wasn't yet ready to tell. "I get it," Mia said softly, giving him a knowing look. "It's not about the spotlight." "No," Julian agreed, his voice steady. "Some moments are just for the people who live them." Mia gave him a respectful nod, her hand resting on the edge of the counter where tools and parts lay scattered. "Well, if you ever change your mind, you know where to find me." He smiled at her. "Thanks, Mia." As Mia turned to leave, Julian's eyes lingered on the model car once more. A deep sense of gratitude filled his chest. Keanu hadn't given him just a car or a gesture. He had given him recognition, a sense of value that no amount of money could buy. It was something that Julian would carry with him every day, quietly but powerfully. Julian returned to his workbench and picked up the model again, cradling it in his palms like a cherished memory. There was a lesson in the gift that Keanu had given him. Something not just about the tangible items, but about how people matter, and how every person is worth more than the roles they play or the titles they hold. As Julian began tightening bolts on a repair, the feeling of the little car model in his hand stayed with him, reminding him of the importance of working with integrity and living with heart. This wasn't about recognition or fame. It was about the quiet power of human connection. Back in the city, the campaign that Mia had led grew stronger, gaining traction with the stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. But in the heart of the dealership, behind the polished showroom windows and the gleaming cars, Keanu's message had already taken root. The legacy of kindness wasn't something that could be bought or sold. It lived in the everyday actions of people, in how they treated one another, whether anyone was watching or not. Keanu's name had become a symbol, one that was bigger than the stories in the papers or the headlines on TV. It was a reminder that greatness wasn't something to be flaunted. True greatness lived in the small, humble moments that were often unseen. As Julian continued his work in his small garage, that lesson would stay with him, as would the model car, his most prized possession. Not because it was a gift, but because it was a reminder of something far more precious: the way that kindness, once given, can transform lives in ways that no one else may ever see. The story of Keanu Reeves, the quiet man who had made all the difference, was one that Julian knew would never need to be told. It had already been lived. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows over the quiet city street. There was no fanfare, no flashing cameras, just the steady sound of Keanu's boots against the sidewalk, the soft rhythm of someone who never needed to announce his presence. He walked with his hands in the pockets of his coat, head slightly bowed, not out of shame, but reflection. A few people passed him by. One or two turned their heads as if they might recognize him, but he offered only a polite nod and kept walking. No sunglasses, no bodyguards, just a man making his way home through the late afternoon stillness. Behind him, the world buzzed. Social media debates raged. News panels dissected the Rolls Royce CEO scandal. Think pieces poured in about celebrity dignity, corporate arrogance, and the power of being underestimated. But Keanu didn't read them. He never had. He hadn't set out to prove anything that day at the dealership. He was only there for Julian, a friend who had fixed his motorcycle for free years ago when no one else would. A man who never asked for favors, only kindness. That was the part the world would never understand. To Keanu, it was never about the insult. It was about the moment. When Vincent spat on the floor, Keanu could have reacted with anger or demands. He could have exposed his identity, humiliated the man publicly, or even walked away. But he didn't. Instead, he had stood there, not because he was weak, but because he was grounded. Because he had learned long ago that power wielded quietly lasts longer than any outburst. The echo of that moment, captured on grainy security footage and shaky phone videos, had traveled farther than any speech could have. It reached people who had never watched his movies. Mechanics, single mothers, nurses, veterans, store clerks. People who knew what it felt like to be invisible. People who had swallowed disrespect just to keep a job, pay a bill, survive another day. Julian once told his nephew that real class wasn't about what you drive. It was about how you treat someone with nothing to offer you. Keanu had simply lived that truth in a way no one could ignore. As he turned the corner toward a quiet park, the streetlights flickered on. Keanu paused near a bench, looked up at the sky for a moment, and breathed in the evening air. He sat down without checking his phone or looking around. Just sat, letting the moment be enough. In the fading light, a small child approached the bench with her mother, holding a paper cup of ice cream. Keanu glanced over and offered a warm smile. The little girl beamed back. Her mother recognized him, but didn't say a word. She simply nodded in respect and guided her daughter to another bench nearby. It was in moments like these that Keanu found peace, not in awards or accolades, not even in redemption, but in the quiet validation that comes from living by a code only he needs to understand. He didn't need the world to see what happened at the dealership. He didn't need a viral clip or praise from strangers. In truth, he would have preferred if no one had noticed at all. But what mattered was that Julian drove home with his dream car, head held high. What mattered was that Mia found her voice and her place. What mattered was that Mr. Avery saw the cracks in his own company and chose to rebuild, not just repair. As the sky turned lavender and the hum of the city softened, Keanu reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small folded note, the kind he often scribbled when a thought came to him. On it were just 4 words: character before reputation. Always. He smiled faintly, folded it back, and placed it in his coat. Moments later, he stood up and began walking again. No particular destination, just forward. There's something powerful about restraint in a world that rewards performance, about silence in a time when noise dominates. Keanu didn't need to win a fight to prove his worth. His value came from knowing exactly who he was and never having to say it out loud. And maybe, just maybe, that's why people connect with him so deeply. Because in a time where titles and fame shout for attention, there's still something irresistible about quiet strength. About a man who doesn't react, but responds. Who doesn't demand, but deserves. Who doesn't pose, but leads. He had nothing to gain that day, and yet, his presence changed everything. That's the story behind the headlines. Not a scandal, not a takedown, but a mirror, held up to show what respect, humility, and presence really look like. So we leave you with this. Have you ever seen someone act with quiet strength when the world wasn't watching? Share their story in the comments. Someone might need to read it today. And if you believe character is louder than titles, let us know what kind of story you'd like to see next with Keanu Reeves. Because sometimes, it's not the biggest voice that changes the room. It's the one that never needed to speak.